get up before the day breaks. I still walk on down to the shore. I watch that sun rising over the eastern ocean, but I don't sail to meet it anymore. How could we let this happen? We saw it coming years ago. The greedy ships just kept getting bigger and bigger, and that sonar told them where to go. Last night I dreamed that I was sailing on a sea galley. We cast our nets upon the water. Jesus pulled them down. Where am I gonna go now? What about this boat I own? What about this old piano? What about my father's bones? Last night I dreamed that I was sailing on the Sea of Galilee. We cast our nets upon the water. Jesus pulled them in with me. Someone sang an old sea shanty, nearly told a mainland joke. Kelly cursed and swore till his voice gave out. Then he asked me for a smoke. Then he took his father's shotgun, walked to the harbor through the town, fired 14 times, woke everyone up, then we all watched that boat going down. Last night I dreamed that I was sailing on the Sea of Galilee. We cast our nets upon the water. Jesus pulled them with me. Last night I dreamed that I was sailing on the Sea of Galilee. We cast our nets upon the water. Jesus pulled them with me. I still get up before the day breaks. I still walk on down to the shore. I watch that sun rising over the eastern ocean, but I don't sail to meet it anymore.
Himi vuam fatar vuam, himi vuam rimulan, himi Cape Breton molua, fatar vuam harantal. That's from a song written by the nephew of my great-great-grandmother. So he's a distant cousin. But anyway, in this song, Alexander MacDonald is singing,
I see far, far from me, in the distance to the high tide, I see Cape Breton, my love, far from me across the sea.
Whew, banger. He was born in 1823, a few miles from the house that I grew up in. But like so many after him, he left for a better life. He could literally see Cape Breton when he wrote this as a very old man looking across from Cape George in around 1903. He says in the lyrics,
I have a desire to be with you as I was, though I know for sure I will never return.
He says you, but he's talking about home. Now me, I could drive to Cape George from my home in about an hour and a half. But for him, in 1903, That was an impossible distance. And I get that. I get him. I learned this song when I was very small. I'm telling you this because I want to talk to you. I want to paint a picture for you about the book that we're here to talk about today. Because we tell ourselves stories about who we are before we know who we are. You have been listening all this time to songs about Nova Scotia that told me who I was before I knew who I was. Some of these I used in my book, Ducks. My old cousin Alexander he's not the only one who is going to pen a lament. Songs about leaving home become a mainstay of Cape Breton culture and the Maritimes in general. They'll sing about a lot of things. They'll sing about longing to return.
How I wish I was with them again.
They'll sing about, they'll sing about leaving.
Over my shoulder, the last time I'll see the old home all weathered and gray.
They sing about economic uncertainty.
Life at home just can't be beat, but who can make $1?
They sing about abandoning your roots.
Where am I gonna go now? What about this boat I own? What about this old piano? What about my father's bone?
They ask others to join them away.
They tell of the coming and the going away. The cities of America draw me away.
Holding on to your identity.
Never forget who you are, son, said he. Yes, I follow my brothers away.
And again, they sing about coming back home.
Home I'll be. Home I'll be. Banished thoughts of leaving. And home I'll be.
Coming home.
Always your rivers are calling to me. I hear the sound, the sweet melody. When we're apart and I feel all alone, carry me home, carry me home.
Carry me home. So what they are doing is, let me just flex this bachelor's degree in anthropology I have for a second. The one I spend the entire book trying to pay off is totally worth it. What they are doing is something called diasporic longing. The lyrics of these songs, they convey collective memory, economic necessity, the aftermath of political and economic forces that drive people into new or further reaches. They often inhabit the melancholy that's waiting for them there far from home. And this has been a part of our culture for so long that even at home, we maintain a diasporic sensibility. We're aware of the map and where everyone is on it and where we are on it. Not that there ever was a time when everyone will be all together again, but there never really even was really a time when we were all together in the first place. And that is the diaspora. This is a culture that's aware of its losses. It's the culture that we talk about to one another. And it has messages that I'm getting from an early age about an adulthood that I'm going to step into. People leave other places for work, but I don't know of many other places where they create entire cultures around it that inform them of their identity or their value of themselves, and that's the thing. Value, if you export labor for generation after generation, eventually you internalize the message that what you love and what you have is not good enough And what you can get somewhere else is fortunate, no matter what it is. They're not the only songs, of course. There's lots of songs about getting loaded at your cousin's wedding or whatever, and a good time had by all.
Hey, sweet darling, let's go dancing tonight.
Oh, that's not why we're here, though.
Oh.
Sorry. The idea of leaving for work and the history around it, it's personal for everyone, it's familiar for everyone. I can't tell you everyone's story, but I can tell you mine. The culture informs me, but I also fit neatly into it like a jigsaw piece, sliding around everyone into it to make the picture. Let me show you. Sorry. It's been a month since we've made this presentation. But first of all, I have to say that this is unceded Mi'kmaq land, all of Cape Breton. My history is rooted here, but that is what it is. That's what I'm talking about. It's Unamaki. Our history is a settler one, a colonial one, and so is the story in this book. But people in my area have been living in the same village for about 220 years and have been leaving it for 120 of those years or more. It's a lot of leaving. But I grew up there.
Teacher?
Yes.
Teacher? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So if they loved it so much, then why did they leave?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. That's the heart of the book, isn't it? Why do they leave? Well, all right. So I will give you a very brief history of Canada, economic history of Canada, to answer that question. So here we go. This is Canada. This is a presentation that we have to give in the United States as well. So this is, you guys will know what this map is. This is Canada. And this is where the money is. And this is where the money is not. No, that's too simple. We're not allowed to get away with telling it like that. See, that's we get told on the East Coast that we simplify things as too romantic. Not allowed to just make this joke. But you don't need to know what I want to tell you to get what I want to say about ducks. But since we're here, I'm gonna talk about it. There's a tendency now to look at the East Coast, the situation on the East Coast, and say from a scholarly viewpoint, let's not get overly romantic about this. You bad for that? On the East Coast, too sentimental. Don't blame Confederation for the way things are now. Don't wish you could have done it differently, if only. Just look at the numbers. They always forecast this. You were always too small, too rural, too rocky, too far away. You were always going to lose people to the bigger players. See, the Atlantic provinces struggled with the loss of markets and reorganization of the modern economy in the early 1900s, and that became a problem that we couldn't climb out of as easily as Ontario. But it's also true that we are small and on the periphery, and yet the business of running Canada is engineered to benefit the core. It's not like Canada is an inevitable thing. It is a made-up thing that is imposed on top of Indigenous land. The real quality export that we have to offer is labor, and it is cheap, and it goes where the engines of capitalism are running. Economic outmigration in Cape Breton becomes a snake that eats its own tail, becoming over time both the cause and the consequence of decline. And all of this is seen as inevitable, unless you can change what capitalism is, and I can't do that. But the engines of capitalism do not run forever. They boom and they bust, and we do too. We go where the work is, and often we go together. Prosperity elsewhere at the cost of families and communities torn apart here.
So that's why?
No, that's not all.
Oh.
That's not all. No, I'm sorry. Because there is a difference between looking at the numbers and living through the numbers. I think people give Cape Breton the once over, if they think of it at all. I don't know if you guys look too far that east over the Rockies, but we're very far away. But economically, if people have given Cape Breton the once over, they've seen how much government money was poured into something like Devco, the coal mine, and then they think, oh, Christ, I'm glad that's gone. What a waste of taxpayer dollars. Wasteful subsidies, thinly disguised welfare is one of these things. There's so many of these. Sorry, these are all from like when I was in high school. There you go. Wasteful subsidies, national addiction. Or if you look at the population numbers and the market trends that bring blow after blow to the area, you think, this makes sense. People leave here for jobs they can't get at home. And the only time the newspapers came to town was when tourism brochures had, like, to take pictures of fiddlers sitting on stumps or or like a coal mine closed. So that was the image that we had around. Jobless nightmare. This is what was going on. If you had been in Cape Breton when I was in high school and they were shutting everything down, everything, I mean the pulp mill, the steel mill, the coal mines, my school, the post offices, everything, the bleakness and the anger and the desperation that was in the air. God, I have so many of these. People's lives aren't numbers. End of days. In hindsight, it's funny because it's not happening right now. And if they are numbers, then we have a few of our own. I was in grade 11 when the Phelan mine shut down. That was the second last coal mine that was operating in Cape Breton. And they did it by closing it down in the middle of the night before the last day that it was supposed to be open. So when people showed up for the last day of work, it was already done and the gate was locked. And I think the owners were long gone. By that point, they said on the news that they wanted to avoid a demonstration. And it seems like that's something that you should be able to do, that you can just close something down in the middle of the night and drive away so that you don't have to watch anyone have feelings about their livelihood being taken away from them. And when you have working class people, you can frame it as though they're about to get violent. But when you read the news report from people walking away from the mine, they were crying. It was actually the second time they tried to close down the Phelan mine. The first time was at Christmas, and they said that they were trying to close it down as an early Christmas present, which is insane. But we were used to the way that corporations were treating workers in Cape Breton. And we also know that 26 miners died at the Westray mine in Plymouth, Nova Scotia, under conditions that they knew were dangerous, just for the chance to work at home instead of away. Many of them were hard rock miners who came home for that job. They had been working in places like Ontario or the Northwest Territories, and they came home to work at Westray to raise their families. And it was a dangerous job. And when they died from massive corporate and government neglect of their safety and of their lives, no one ever went to jail for it. Westray, despite the efforts of many, become a disaster instead of a crime. And a disaster is no one's fault. I was 9 when that happened, And I went to the wake of Angus MacNeil because he was from my village. And there was no body because they couldn't get him up out of the ground. And then I knew my worth as a person from home looking for a job like that. And I'm talking about these mines that are not oil sand mines because they taught me about working for one. And these are the jobs we are supposed to be grateful to have where I'm from. And I was grateful to have one when I went to the oil sands. But still, people's lives aren't numbers. I've been to the airports all over now. I have never seen parents crying in them the way they do at the Stanfield Airport in Halifax, watching their adult children leave for the West. But that's not new, because every parent knows the scene. You drive your car away with your mother standing in the door until the car is out of sight. And then you see her in the rearview mirror, standing there. She won't go back into the house until the taillights are gone. Why do they leave? Because they have to.
Teacher?
Yes.
Can I go use the washroom now?
No.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, things got heavy. Anyway, ironically, the image that gets tossed around out east, which you might be familiar with, is that everyone is lazy and they don't want to work. But listen, we like to play along with that. We have a good sense of humor. And, oh God.
Hey! What are you doing home? I thought you were working out west.
I got laid off.
You got laid off.
I did.
Did you make enough stamps for the pokey or what?
I did.
Yes, yes. Well, listen, jump on. I got a few cold beer down in Jackie's boat. We're going to jig some herring for the bass fishing later.
I'm sorry. We were like, we really need to have something in there after that whole mining bit. And I think that some of you guys couldn't read the captions and have no idea what happened. So my character has gotten laid off and is walking down the road with beer, and then Peter's character comes up on a four-wheeler and is happy to meet my character because we've all got enough stamps for Pogie, and we're all going to go on Jackie's boat and fish.
We're gonna go get some mackerel to go bass fishing.
Yeah, and
We're gonna go get drunk.
yes,
Basically.
on Jackie's boat.
And does everybody know what Pogie is?
What? I thought that was a fully Canadian thing. We have to explain it to you Americans, but Pogie's unemployment. You get like Pogie boots or like rubber boots. Come on. I don't even know whether Pogie boots are called rubber boots or Pogie boots. I don't. Because I don't know.
That's our homework.
That's our homework. Find out why. Anyway, Pogie's great. When you're on it, life's a dream. On the East Coast.
And you work, everything's cash.
Everything is just free money from the government, the way we like it. So, back to our story. So, this is a very serious book. This pattern of leaving, okay, it's a pattern I know well. Are you ready?
I got cousins everywhere, man, I got cousins everywhere. I got cousins in Boston, Montana, Detroit, Sudbury, Elliott Lake, Edmonton, Windsor, Calgary, Halifax, Fort McMurray, Toronto. I got cousins everywhere.
It's true. Mining, harvesting, logging, domestic service, auto factories. My family, like everybody else is out east, they've been to all of them when it was time to go. And I'm pretty sure that the small towns here in BC export labor in the very same way when the logging industry shut down and the other factories and everything like that, because there was a lot of people in BC working up in Fort McMurray. Now, you know, funny too, when I did this in Halifax and Toronto, my family members were in the audience, and they're like, that's me. That's my cousin David. He's like, that's me. I was like, that's right. I didn't ask your permission. Well, we have letters and things that I gathered when I was making this book from family members going back to 1904, letters coming back and forth. Let me read you some of these different letters. Some excerpts from these different letters we're going to read.
I'm working steady here. This was once a good mining camp. I would like to see Mabel once more, and if all goes well, may yet see it. I know it has changed very much since I left.
Hello, my little girl, Essie. Well, we have lots of wood home, and we finished digging the potatoes. September is gone. Soon will be Christmas, and Essie will be home again.
We were up to Elliott Lake last week for 4 days. Would have stayed if we could get work. Couldn't buy a job there. When we came to the causeway coming back, we had to put the pennies together to get across. Had fun, though. The car is working okay.
How are you? Come back to Cape Breton soon. We're always glad to see you. Thanks for the birthday card you sent. I meant to answer long ago, but Mary was sick at the time. Thank the good Lord she's well now. I'd be very lonely if she was sick. Don't forget Cape Breton.
I'm cutting pulp for LQ, making pretty good, so I'll pay your ticket home for Christmas. Even half, if you'll agree. Don't have to tell anyone. I know you won't want to come home if you can't pay it yourself. So I offered. I can afford some. It'll be your present. How are the cowboys treating you?
Like I said, the oldest of these letters is from 1904. But I could have written any of them, and that is the thing. This isn't just going for a job somewhere. It's much more than that. It's a connection that we have to one another. See, I don't know what it was like for my grandnans to go and be maids in Boston in the 1930s, and yet I know exactly what it was like in some way. And although I had aunts and uncles who went, my sisters and I were the first ones in our direct line to go to university. The expansion of student loan programs is what made this possible. Whoops, I was supposed to go ahead on some of these. Getting on some planes. Anyway, what I knew best about the push and pull of staying and leaving, I learned from my mom's family. Her siblings all went out to Ontario to work in and around the auto boom sector of the 70s, and she worked out there too for a while. But every summer, for 2 weeks, they would all come home. And we would all basically live at Grandma's house, and I never saw them all so happy. And then they had to leave. And my aunts would cry going back to the car for the 2-day drive back. My grandpa would cry watching them go, and my grandma would take her silent sorrow back into the house. My mom would take her grief to ours. That's me. By the food. And where it had once been so loud, it became so quiet. And I saw my options laid out before me. You will have this choice, and either one of these options hurts you, staying or leaving. But what choice is there when you have no money and everyone is leaving? Here in droves, everyone is leaving the East, everyone is leaving Cape Breton. And in 2001, here we go. In 2001, party strategist for the Canadian Lines, John McInnis says,
Eastern provinces believe in handouts and give me a check for doing nothing.
Ouch. Oh, sorry to pick on John, but people are always saying shit like that about us. You look outside your window to the people who have money, and and this is what they think of you. And you do internalize it. Anyway, he got fired. So that sucks. And Stéphane Dion, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, said in the year that I graduated university, 2005,
There's no environmental minister on earth who can stop the oil from coming out of the sand because the money is too big.
Ooh. I can't imagine the environmental minister, climate change minister saying that today, and I don't think I was that much in tune with climate change things myself in 2005, but that's where we were at. And yet somehow no one was really talking about the oil sands except the people whose lives were in it. In 2005, in my university, people were talking about Hurricane Katrina, the war in Darfur, Kanye West. We're still talking about Kanye West. No one was really talking about the oil sands. And that's where I found myself in the beginning of this book. So I thought nothing of going there. My Uncle Jerry said,
Get a job in the tool crib, girl. That's how you can get into the camp, where you can get the best pay.
because I didn't have a trade to cash in on. I never heard of a tool crib or a camp, but Jerry worked in Sudbury in the nickel mines, or wherever they do there. Yeah. So he knew about that stuff. So they call it the big nickel. So I said, that's what I'll do. People have been coming and going for so long, and I had been in the culture for so long that I thought nothing of it. Ducks is about all of this. It's all in the background. It's the water we're all swimming in. I say this because although Fort McMurray is incredibly diverse, my experience in it was a maritime one surrounded for the most part by other Atlantic Canadians. People tend to stick to their own. I made this book and it looks like I'm presenting a story that's just mine, but to me, it always looked like I fell in step with something that was happening and happening and happening over time, through time. And I was prepared to work. I was prepared to go there even though I didn't know anything about the oil sands or the job that I was applying for, and I was naive about a lot of things. But one of them stands out the most because I have been talking about the culture that we talk about and what we share, but we don't talk about everything. I thought, because of our shared background, that we were all the same. When I got there and there were so few women where I was, then I found out that we weren't the same. I don't know why I expected something different, but I did. I thought people who were different from me came from cities, had money, something like that. In university, that's who I felt a world away from, the rich kids. If you were going to work in the oil sands, you must be going for the same reason that I was, so we were the same, weren't we? But no. I was too inexperienced. I found out quickly the way of things. That wasn't in any of the folk songs or the shared stories. It's not who we like to think that we are. But if I had looked a little closer, then I would have seen it. This has subtitles, so if you can't see it, you might want to try. Because it's hard to understand.
I left and get into it Sunday night. $22 ticket to Regina. We got to Regina on Thursday evening at 3 o'clock. Never the same train. The stop where you were there at the train come by. Every 500 miles to stop for a new crew order. The toilet's dirty. Locked in the floor of the beer bottles and broken windows. Oh, crisis. We're dirty. We're starved. I had $2 in my pocket and a half, so that's that. This fellow walked up to me. He said, "You boy looking for a job?" I said, "Yes, sir." "You come from a farm or a city?" "A farm." "Can you handle a horse?" I said, "Yes, sir." "Can you stoop sheaves?" I said, "Yes, sir." "I don't want two boys. I'll take you for us." I said, "Oh, if we're going to."
This is my grandfather, Angus. He went on the harvest trains in 1926. These were the big harvest excursions where maritimers would come out and the big grain harvest for the prairies for more money than they ever dreamed of back home, before everything became mechanized and the harvest boom went out. Mostly young men. They'd board the... does that sound familiar? Does that sound like a book you just read? They board the trains out east. The trains were kind of like moving work camps. And this is what Angus said. Left Antigonish, 1 p.m. Monday. Went into Regina Thursday. 1,200 people on the train. There was one car for school teachers. Fellow from Glace Bay and Sydney were full of the devil. Fellows from Glace Bay and Sydney. Smashed up the train some. There were 5 railroad cops, but they did nothing. No food on the train. Some of the men raided and looted along the way. And these trains, they were notorious for looting places they stopped at along the way, which was a terrifying sight. And smashing things up on the train. They'd land with the windows broken. They'd be called fresh air specials. And there are lots of newspaper clippings like this about bad behavior on the trains. Just a lot of young men out of their element and on the edge. And you have to understand that none of them had any food or money, and they weren't given any food. They were boxed in on something like a prison train, and often people would try to swindle them out of the little that they did have, knowing that they were rubes. And if they had or wanted anything, it was liquor, because young men are young men. And sometimes they would lose it in these literally boxed-in conditions. You heard my papa say, we were dirty, we were starved. And did you catch that one thing, though? It was quick. He said, 1 car for school teachers. Women. How would you think they felt on that train? I think I know. So one of the biggest years for the harvest was 1908. And in that year, we have one of these school teachers taken from her car, stripped, gang raped by 12 men. The CPR manager in this story, which is hard to read, says that he believes there is some rowdyism on the train, but we have guards. I don't believe the majority of the men would just let that happen, he says. So he has his doubts. But remember what my papa said? 5 guards for 1,200 people. What are they going to do? And as for other people intervening, I think you would be surprised. And all the stories about bad behavior, they're always couched with the reassurance it's only a minority who do the damage. The rest of the people are fine. And most of the headlines about the harvester's arrival are like this one. No, it's more than that. Stalwart sons of the East arrived. They are in praise of the harvesters, who are much needed workers. And all of this is true. Of course it is. Of course only a few people are the troublemakers. And of course most of the people are fine. And of course they were much needed workers. And all of this is true. But what comfort is that to the woman who was pulled from her car? So, I started seeing a new therapist recently. He says that I disassociate when bad things happen. I try to leave my body, get away from myself, go away. This is a page from Ducks. And something bad is happening. But I'm not there, in a way. And by seeing a new therapist recently, I mean after I finished the book. So I drew this before I had a name for what I was doing or had been doing. And where am I when this bad thing is happening? Hi mi vuam vata vuam, hi mi vuam brimulon, hi mi Cape Breton molua, vata vuam harantal. So I live back in Cape Breton now, in my hometown. My old cousin Alexander, he sings, to be with you as I was. He longs to be with you as I was. But I think he and I both know something about never returning in different ways.
thank you for that. I feel like we just got a little witness into the next book or something. I'm so involved now in that story. And I guess when I finished your book the other night, I wanted to start this conversation with a thank you, because I felt like you, for sharing your story with us and with the world. The book is so raw. It's so full of kind of humanity and complexity. And for someone who's spent, like, I don't know, I've spent maybe 10 15 years in and out of the oil sands and the conversation about it, and I've spent a lot of time there, but I felt like we all got a window into the complexity of what it's like and the pressure on people who are living there and experiencing it day to day as their lives and as their homes, in a way that none of us have been able to do. There's been a lot of security and secrecy around the camps. And
yeah, you're not allowed in without the badge.
Yeah.
The site badge. And there's a lot of reporting that happens from a car that can only take a picture from from the road.
Yeah. So let's talk about ducks, and let's talk about your experience in, maybe start us from the beginning for those who haven't read the book, around what was it like for you when you first got there? Because you'd heard stories, obviously there's family connections of lots of people who had been there, but your drawings are so spare, yet they're so powerful about what it's like when you
I hadn't actually heard a lot when I landed there about what it was like. Do you remember when I said, no, it's like my Uncle Jerry worked in Sudbury and mine, whatever the heck they do there? Like, I know stories about people, like, those uncles, they have hard hats that are dented from rock falls and things, and yet I don't know the details of a lot of stuff. Like, I didn't know about... I didn't even know what a camp was, that kind of thing.
Before you went, like when you got there, you didn't.
No, even in the book, I'm like, is a camp like you're living in tents? And they're like, what? No, no. But if it was living in tents, I was gonna go because that's what people were doing. But I was extremely naive. I just didn't have any experience in it. I was just going. Everybody was going, and I went, and that's just I was just on the wave of it.
So let's stay there for a minute with that whole question of not knowing, because that's an interesting thing, right? When you have all these people coming back and forth. Mm-hmm. But I think it might relate to one of the terms that sticks with me from your book. You talk about people masking, almost like that the people who live in the camp are different and shut off from the life that's out there. And when you're in there, you don't talk about the life that's out there. When you're out there at home, you don't talk about the life that's in there.
Yeah, in a sense. My cousins who work in the camps and stuff right now, I don't... if you ask them, like, how is it? They're like, oh, it's good. It's fine. Yeah, and even when I was working on the book, and I'd be like... I'd want to know for reference or something, like, how different is this from now, that kind of thing. And I'd be pressing them for sort of details. They were really spare. I'd be like, Garth, what's this thing like? And he'd be like, oh, I don't know, it's fine. I don't want to talk about it. It's not, it's definitely two different worlds. And there's a reason that people feel like they don't know that world, because it's very rarely represented outside of our the day-to-day that is like in the city or outside of. And yet I think I was seeing some nodding and some recognition even when I was talking here, because I feel like there are some people in the audience who have worked in these places, and maybe. Yes, yeah. Have worked in some of the work camps and places. Yeah. So even though in the book, in the reviews of the book, people have called it things like showing a hidden world, or showing like a place that is rarely seen or talked about, or everything. This is a real pan-Canadian experience. That there are lots of people from all over the country that work there, that have, worked these jobs, and it's just that work experience is very little represented in our culture outside of that place.
Well, and I wonder, you wrote this book in 2005. It's a very different time. The issues were different, as you mentioned, and I wonder if the divisiveness around the issues now has created even more of a silence about what people are experiencing in the workplace, in the camps, and what that's doing to their lives, because there's almost you don't talk about it because there's a loyalty now. You're on one side or the other.
I think that depends on where you are. Certainly in some places it's more polarizing than other places. On the East Coast, I don't find that kind of polarization. There's a general understanding that people are out there to work, and it's, a lot of people went out there to provide for their families, say when there were zero options. But I know that in Alberta it's extremely polarized. It's hard to say, but other things have gotten better. The discussion around mental health in those places is miles better than there was. Zero discussion when I was there. It was not an option to talk about, and it was not on the table. And now you do see people talking about it where the discussion was just empty before. Right. So, it's hard to say. Yeah.
In a lot of ways, Ducks is a book about class.
Oh,
and,
yes.
Curse, the boom and bust, and it becomes really clear when you spend your year in Victoria, the contrast of what you're living in the camps and why you're going, and the impact of on the families, etc. And then Victoria. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Victoria was the first place that I lived that had like bona fide rich people in it. And it was nice. You went around and there was nice things. That they had high tea, and they had mansions, and there was the real facade of niceness, and yet there was that aloofness of privilege and class that comes with that, where in the book I have things like the redlining practice that was going on at the time, where they wanted to keep people who at the time, if I'm correct, BC had gotten rid of a certain amount of mental health beds in its hospital system, and just sort of like gotten rid of those beds. And so the people who occupied those rooms didn't just go home, they went onto the streets. And that, coupled with the fact that Victoria is a place where people migrated to, who people, experiencing homelessness around house people, just generally meant that there was like quite a number. And one of the solutions that came up was for police to come and pick people up out of the downtown core and bring them to outside of a certain parameter where they wouldn't be seen by tourists, things like that, or wouldn't be seen by that they just get out of the way, which is an ugly practice, and yet you met people all the time in Victoria who had many harsh opinions about something like the oil sands, or I remember certain types of environmentalism that seemed very very privileged in a certain way that was very removed from people's lives. Walking downtown Victoria, and there was a woman with a car, and all over her car was all decorated with "Stop the Seal Hunt." It was all like painted all over her car and stuff, and she's driving around with this, and I was like, "What you don't know anything about the seal hunt? You're like, this is like an indigenous practice, and it's like, you know, like so far away from here." And that was like I guess it was like a very du jour thing of 2007 anyway, I suppose. I don't know, when did Paul McCartney show up? And like,
It was much earlier than that.
I don't
actually.
remember. Anyway, yeah, like Paul McCartney's like a zillionaire, and he like showed up in Labrador or somewhere and was like, don't. Anyway, but she just felt like very removed from reality to me after being up like in somewhere like that was very where the problems of resource extraction and all of these things felt so immediate, and then you go into a city where people are just like, you know, buying like organic quinoa and stuff, and they're like, I don't like, you know, my main concern is like the seal hunt, and you're like, oh god. And the sort of like facade of polite society that like takes people with mental health problems and like dumps them behind a wall. You felt that ugliness, and then when people learned that you worked in the oil sands, and they were like, no, you know, it like the kind of that kind of
Judgment.
class judgment, yeah, from someone who never had to make that choice,
Right.
was never presented with that sort of harsh reality of like when I was saying over there that everything was closing down, and when we go to the guidance counselor's office, and they were like, you need to leave, you need to go, and you need to go where the work is, and you go where the work is. And when I say that, like, when I was bringing up Westray and the Phelan Mine and all of this stuff, and I was saying that corporations and governments, they do what they want. And that was the message that we got. We were like, you go, the company treats you badly, you get the money, and that is, you know,
The way the world works.
That's the way the world, and that, you know, that's you should be grateful for a job. And later on you become cognizant of, like, I have choices, I have rights, I have things that I can demand better, but I didn't know enough really at the time. I had a college degree, but it was a BA. It seemed that even with my, my parents were like, you have the degree now, like, you should be able to
get a big job.
Like, to them it was like, you have the degree, you should be able to, like, that's your ticket out. But of course it doesn't mean anything. It's just that.
I met a lot of students.
Yeah, and all of my friends, it seemed, who were from, like, Ontario or wherever, it seemed like they were all going into into careers that like, you know, they were all going into unpaid internships and stuff, and I immediately reverted back to just being from my small town where everybody was being shipped out for work.
Yeah, and then you went back after a year in Victoria.
Yeah, because I was working a few jobs making basically minimum wage.
Right.
And I couldn't support myself.
Earlier when we were talking, you said something
anyway.
about just jobs trumps all. You know, there's a point.
Yeah.
Where that's what.
Yeah, when it comes to the oil sands, every single argument that you make against it is scooped by the fact that it makes money and has jobs. And you can be like, oh, it's bad for the environment. And they'd be like, yeah, but the jobs. And be like, oh, well, it's, you know, climate change. And they're like, yeah, but the jobs. And it doesn't... That's our collective sort of bargaining chip for keeping it there. Mm. And I don't have a solution for that. That's just the fact that it's...
I'm trying to find a solution for that. For really
that it's a tough one. It's a tough one, and it's a tough thing to bring to people who are working there. You know, to be like, listen, this is bad, and you have to leave. This industry has to go away, without making them feel like they did something wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I do think now that it's a different time, right? That's just 2005 when you first moved there. And in a lot of ways, we get the opportunity of being along with you for your burgeoning awareness of the complexity of these issues and you know, in indigenous rights, environmental issues, climate change. You're figuring it out as you're there. There's some really incredible moments in the book. You know, I remember at one point you said, and then I realized Fort McKay wasn't another mine.
Oh yeah, because it's so close to Syncrude, and of course it predates Syncrude, but we drove by it and there's just a little sign that says Fort McKay, and I was like, oh, that must be another mine, because like there's tons of them. There's Syncrude, there's TNRL, and Suncor and Aurora and all these. There's just like so many. When you look on the map, you're like lots and lots and lots.
I've been lost up there many times.
I know you would get lost up there. And then someone was like, no, that's a town. It's the Fort McKay like Indigenous Reserve. And you're like, that's a town? Like, you, what? Because Fort McMurray is like 40 minutes or something from Syncrude, right? Fort McKay is like 10 minutes from Syncrude. And it's right there. And you think, like, this shouldn't be allowed. But, of course it is, because that's the Canadian way, to just let a company come and be like, here we are. Mm. You wouldn't want to live there. You wouldn't want to have your house with a gigantic oil company mining and dumping shit in your water, like, right next to you. But that's what happened. And and no, I didn't know. Like, I went there because everybody was going for work, and that's where everybody went to the car factories for work. Everybody went to the other mines for work. Everybody went, and then but when you're there and you're sort of acclimating to what is actually going on, and the scale of it. You take that in. It's a lot. It's humbling.
Yeah. There's a moment where you find a video of an Indigenous elder. I'm sorry, I don't remember her
Selena
name.
Harp.
Selena Harp. And you're there, so you're in the camps.
Yeah.
You're Googling, and you come up with this video. Can you talk about what that was like, seeing her and hearing her words, and then being there? Because I think many of us have had our reckoning moments with the impacts of resource extraction, whether it's the oil sands or fracking in northern BC or logging here, or even your climate reckoning moment. We're not always literally in the middle of the development when that happens.
No, that video came up because someone that we knew who used to work at the student paper at Mount Allison was part of a grassroots paper called The Dominion. And they were putting up videos of like anti-oil sand stuff. And it was one of the only like things that was putting up anti-oil sands things. Mm-hmm. Because it was really the sort of nascent movements at that time. We like to think, like we sort of congratulate ourselves now or have kind of rose-colored glasses about how we've always cared about climate change and things, but we haven't. Not in the same way, you know, when you think about 2005, we care so much now, but it's a curve, right? Mm-hmm. And this is just sort of burgeoning. And so for a publication to be going that hard at that time was rare.
Yeah.
So he, Drew, and company, it's Dominion, were putting up stuff, and that was one of the videos was this interview with Selena Harp, and she was talking about different things, but what really hit hard was how she was saying how people that she knew had cancer, and people in Fort McKay, and also people in Fort Chip, north of Fort McMurray, had cancer, these rare cancers. And she was saying, oh my God, we have all these rare cancers we never had. And you can't hear that and not be struck by the truth of it. It's just a fact when someone's telling you that they have these rare cancers. And of course, I come from an island that had the largest toxic waste site in North America, the Sydney tar ponds, which gave people cancer for many years. And they didn't clean it up until after Sydney Steel closed down. And was also situated next to the least white areas in Sydney, but it was in the middle of the town of Sydney. And if it's in a poor area, if it's in a non-white area, if it's in working class sort of area, it's something that corporations can hide and governments can dilly-dally around and not clean up. And it makes people sick. It doesn't matter. Sydney Steel shut down. They didn't clean up the tar ponds until 2007, maybe. But in the meantime, people are dying. Anyway, so this is a narrative I've heard before. And the angry thing, that is not a way to say it. But anyway, I watched that video in 2008, and there was a doctor, I think his name was Dr. John O'Connor.
Yeah.
He was the doctor at Fort Chip. He was trying to get people to listen to the fact that these cancers were happening, bile duct cancer, I think it was, which is a very specific thing. I doubt you know anyone who has had bile duct cancer. So they did a review. The government said that the Alberta Government Health Services or whatever, they said they did a review and they found that there was no link between the oil companies and these cancers. And Dr. O'Connor got fired, and he doesn't live in Alberta anymore. And that is the biggest pile of horseshit I've ever heard. And
he is back in Alberta.
Is he back in Alberta? Okay, that's good. Well, that's good. But the findings, if you can imagine the oil companies being on the hook for making people ill and dying, you can imagine them being on the hook for so much punitive damages. Mm-hmm. And you know, you can just hear the paper shredder in the back room going off. If you want to be angry about something, you can be angry about that.
Yeah. And I think it was last year that we passed the record. Now we have 1 trillion liters of toxic sludge now in the unlined pits in the oil sands, which is now the biggest on Earth. And they're still leaking.
No doubt. And you know what? It's in like a broader scope. Many of the workers who come to work in the oil sands, if they're going to get sick with something like cancer, they're going to do it at home, back where they come from, and there are going to be no statistics to take with them because they fly in and fly out. So when they get cancer years later in British Columbia or in Nova Scotia or Newfoundland or wherever, it's not going to be linked back to the time that they spent at Syncrude or wherever, even though they worked there for 20 years. And who's going to fund that study? No one.
I want to get, so there's one of the shocking statistics in the beginning, and I can't remember if I read it in the book or if I saw it in one of your interviews, but that the ratio was about 50 to 1 of men to women in the
That
camps?
depended on where you were. I put that in there, but I should have qualified it with that sometimes it'd be 10 to 1, sometimes it really depended on the I think the highest ratio was that in one of the camps.
But so you're living in an environment that is predominantly men, and your book, despite the harassment and abuse, your book is full of empathy and an exploration. In some ways, I think you called it a capsuled off society, and the behavior of some of the men, the kind of persistent sexual harassment, it almost seems in the book understandable to you. And you talk about references of how their husbands and fathers and cousins when they're at home. And I guess so. There's one of the things I found the most surprising, maybe. It was almost in your writing and in your drawings of that part of your experience, a lack of anger.
Oh, I'm angry. You can't live with people and not absorb their perspective, I think. I have lots of anger, but I also I was young enough to see and take in a lot of what I was looking at. You know how you're like a sponge when you're young enough. I had no responsibilities to anyone like a lot of people did. I had no financial responsibilities except for my loan. And people were quick to remind me of how if I didn't like it, there's the door. I didn't have to stay. A lot of people there, they felt, they had to stay. No one was waiting on me for their next meal, that kind of thing. Yeah. You saw the pressures that people were under. You saw the reasons that they came versus the reasons that you came. You saw the privileges that I had over them, over people twice my age, say. And the way that they lashed out at you sometimes on their own pain, and the way that we have socialized men at that time, hopefully things are changing. It doesn't mean I, and liked it or that I, but later on when things happen, oil prices bottomed out and things like suicides went up in Alberta. And when you hear things like that, you'd have to be pretty hard-hearted not to feel like, God, I know where this came from. When you're in those camp environments, some people take it fine. Some people are fine. They're not bothered by anything. They live day to day. They don't bother anybody. They just do their work. They go home. They don't mind it. They listen to music in their truck. They drive around. And some people don't take it well at all. So some people become, the fact that schedule is so punishing, those hours are so long, everything you are as a person, if you're working that kind of job long enough, everything you are as a person is sort of taken away from you, and all you are is your work. And it can be dehumanizing and devaluing. And they always joke that like this is the place with like the most divorces and things like that. And then if people were falling on hard times in their life, in their private life, suffering from loneliness, isolation, if they had a divorce, if things were not going well, there wasn't a culture of like, hey buddy, let's talk about it. It was like, let's get fucking wasted, or like, here's some drugs, and then it would be self-immolation. Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't make you angry, it would make you sad. And if people, harassing me was an outlet for the kind of like anger that came with some of that, I hated it. But I also, you could see a bigger picture as well, that was a lot of people in a system that hurt everybody, including me.
Wow. Well said. And there's a moment where you talk about a worker getting a call from his little kid.
Yeah.
And he takes that, and the mask drops off. And it was in what you just described and the way you worded that, and in that point in the book, the empathy for what people are experiencing and what these people are going through. When you saw that mask drop, it was extremely powerful moment.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, that moment, if you haven't read the book, he was a guy I was like getting workers' sheets. I was collecting sheets of something, and his phone rang, his personal phone, and he saw it, and he thought it was his wife. It was in the middle of the day, and he was like, my wife never calls in the middle of the day. He thought it was an emergency. And you could see that for that moment he was terrified. So we all stared at his phone for like a second, and the foreman was like, take it. So he went and he took it, but it was his kid. It was like his 6-year-old son, who was like, Daddy, come home. And he was like, I'll see you on the next plane, buddy. Like, wait for me in the sky. And then he's like, don't take mommy's phone. Like, put mommy's phone back in her purse, and don't, like, tell her to call me later. But then, you could see that he really thought that his wife was calling to say that, like, somebody died. But before then, I'd never really seen him sort of like emote very much. And not that everybody was like that. Some people would talk your face off about their kids, especially because I was a woman. They'd be like, let me tell you all about my kids. And you're like, oh. Or let me tell you about my divorce. Nobody gossips more than all the men on site, let me tell you. Let me tell you all about this guy's divorce.
So there, I'm getting the high sign. We're going to have to wrap up, and I just wanted to ask you, what's been the reaction to the book coming out to some of those people, from some of those... Has this never played that long before? Are we going to see something else up here? It's like Peter just went by in a towel in the video.
I forget
that's awesome. Keep it on.
I forget that that's how it ends.
Well, he was wearing a towel.
That's good. It's a little sexy ending for you.
Okay. I have two last questions
for
you. One, I'm going to cue them both up because we're going to have to end
Yes,
soon.
okay, yeah.
One is curious about the reaction to the book, backlash from folks you're still in touch with, or like
no.
What has that been like for you?
No backlash. The reaction has all been good. I was in touch with almost everybody that I could get in touch with. I changed like most of their names, so the only names I kept were like my cousin and my sister and my friend. But everybody else I changed, but I called them, or if I had their phone number, or I messaged them on Facebook and stuff, and they've all been really, really great. In fact, we're doing this presentation in Sydney later in the month, and Brian, who's in the book, should be coming to that one, which will be nice. He's doing well, by the way. I talked to, I was in Newfoundland for a little while, and I met up with Emily, who's in the book, and she was very supportive, and I talked on the phone to, I called him Joe in the book, and I had to like message his daughter on Facebook and was like, "Is your dad?" Because there's like his Facebook is one of those old men Facebooks that's just like a picture of him with a motorcycle. And like never updates, that kind of thing. So you had to do some of that sleuthing and like be like find their children and be like, what's your dad's phone number?
Was there a response from industry? Were there online?
No,
online
you know what was funny though? When I was making the book, my parents and my aunts and uncles and stuff, they were like, are the oil companies going to sue you? Like they thought that they were going to come after me. This is the kind of like fear of corporations and companies that people have. And I was like, let them fucking try. It's a bad look for them if they do. But it's true. Like we were almost raised in that kind of culture that would like, do not like go against like the company. The company is like the most powerful sort of thing. And I felt that when I was working for like an oil company, that they were just like extremely powerful. And like it's always like, be grateful for the job, be grateful for the money. I never asked for like a raise. I never did anything. So I understand that sort of like where they were like, are you sure you can make this book? Like as if like some like the Shell van is gonna come and like throw me in and like drive away.
Well, that is amazing that you've been able to do this and that with this complexity and tell all of these stories and not have that later. Can we talk about your tips? Because I want to figure out how to not get that backlash. But really, my last question was to ask if you have any advice for the writers and graphic novelists and cartoonists who are here. Because you've kind of done the Holy Grail thing where you are doing what you love, and you're doing it online, and you're open sourcing a lot of your work, and you have millions, even incredible following, and you're making a living doing it with not, of course, just this book, but your successful comics, etc. And is there a secret sauce? Is there some tips that you can share with others?
I don't know. I think that I have always tried to be, as best as I could, very honest with myself, with my work, and when I talk to, readers and everything, but also within my work, which I think was harder to do in the beginning because you're always trying to be like, look at me, look what I did, and you think you have to like slip on like a persona or something, or like try and do what other people are doing. But I think that people respond more when you are like a genuine person, and that's like
the authenticity.
Yeah, and like
we live in a world that's not really full of that. It feels like, and it really rings through in your work.
I guess, but I feel like you know how like kids can always like whenever you're like, eat this, it's good, and they're like, yeah, right, yeah. Yeah. We're all really good at spotting that kind of disingenuous thing, because even when you say like the authenticity, like we're always being sold authenticity, but we're always like, yeah, right. But I think that like it feels good to just knock off like trying too hard to do something other than the thing that you want to do, or the person that you want to be. Like the minute that I was like, I'm corny, I was like, yeah, I am corny. It's good.
A little bit geeky. There's that whole Deadwood series where you're watching Deadwood and stuff.
Yeah. We watched all of that, and we watched Carnival in the camp room. But I'm like I like to dress like an old witch, and I will embarrass my children with my jokes later on, and I like I just feel like the thing that you are gonna be the best at is the thing that you want to be doing the most right now. Not the thing that you think that you have to be doing, or you know what I mean?
Totally.
And as for like talking through to like workers in the oil fields and stuff, I think it's just knowing that they're exactly the same. You know, it's not really that much of a puzzle to figure out. I don't think that's the main thing, I think. And when you read the book, I don't think anybody in there is like a person that you haven't met. I think that's the when you pull back the like curtain, you're like, oh yeah, there's people I know. They're in this work environment that is a thing that changes people, you know, or re-socializes them. Yeah. But on the surface, they're everyone that you already know. Yeah.
Congratulations, Kate, on this
thanks.
incredible book.